Alrighty, sorry about the delay. Let's get rocking. So, oh, what is it doing? That's odd. Oh, that's what it's doing. Okay. Whoops. So, welcome back to Free Read Fridays. I'm your intrepid narrator, Fragath, and today I have to do a short one. Because I got a bunch of stuff going on, and so yeah, anybody who's American, I hope you're recovering adequately from uh, whatever food you may have gorged yourself on yesterday. For my bit, that is me being nice. So real quick, just want to give a quick shout out to some of the people to everybody, in fact, who's commented on any of the YouTube videos ever. Um, I don't care what you've said. Thanks at least for noticing me. Notice me. I'm just screaming into the void. Otherwise, so what's the point? Is what you might be asking. And that's certainly what I ask almost every day. Why am I here? So, in particular, the two most recent, which are both related to the Echopraxia streams, Crab asks if there's a missing part to Echopraxia. I have to actually check on that video. Um, there should not be. Because there were a couple of them that I had to do really short, but I'll double check if it has. If worst comes to worst, I'll re-record part of it if I have to. And then Sir Sluggo asks, basically, how have you not been noticed? And there's a simple answer to that: the algos. Also, it's super niche. I'm glad that you enjoyed Blind Sight. I'm sad that you don't have Echopraxia in your country. Hopefully, Mr. Watts will have his available, have Echopraxia available soonish. Under words that I've forgotten. What's it called? Creative Commons license. Hopefully, he's done that with Blindside. He's done that with the entire Rifters trilogy. So fingers crossed that he'll be able to do that at some point in the near future with Echopraxia. I've heard no word as to whether he's going to do that or not. He did recently post yet another blurblet from his upcoming third book in that trilogy, which I think is tentatively titled Omniscience, which looked pretty interesting. So there is movement there. But in any case, yeah, I haven't been noticed because the algos, and this is really niche. Um, I think it's also possible that like blind sight makes people feel very uncomfortable, and therefore echopraxia makes them feel uncomfortable. I don't blame them. It made me feel uncomfortable, and I loved the hell out of it. I'm still like, wow, this makes me feel things. I don't know if I like these things that I feel. Without further ado, though, I do have to get cracking. It's going to be a real short one today. It's only two short stories, and they're both like really not long at all. So we're starting off with Acid Bath by Vaseleos Garson. The Starway's lone watcher had expected some odd developments in his singular, nerve-fraught job on the asteroid, but nothing like the weird 21-day liquid test devised by the invading Steel Blues. So as a bit of a treat today, I'm going to have these both visible so you can read along, I guess. These are both gleaned from the science fiction section of Project Gutenberg. I really think I forgot to include a link. Just look up Project Gutenberg, and you will surely find both of those. Um, I'm not super thrilled with how they have Project Gutenberg laid out lately, but you can find things still. All right, so give me one sec to get another sip of water here, and we'll get on moving and rocking. Acid Bath by Vaseleos Garson. John Carroll was bolting in a new baffle plate on the stationary rocket engine. It was a tedious job and took all his concentration, so he wasn't paying too much attention to what was going on in other parts of the little asteroid. He didn't see the peculiar blue spaceship, its rockets throttled down, as it drifted to land only a few hundred yards away from his plastic igloo. Nor did he see the half-dozen steel-blue creatures slide out of the peculiar vessel's airlock. It was only as he crawled out of the depths of the rocket power plant that he realized something was wrong. By then, it was almost too late. The six blue figures were only 50 feet away, approaching him at a lope. John Carroll took one look and went bounding over the asteroid's rocky slopes in 50-foot bounds. When you're a lone watcher and strangers catch you unawares, you don't stand still. You move fast. It's the watcher's first rule. Stay alive. An Earthship may depend upon your life. As he fled, John Carroll cursed softly under his breath. The automatic alarm should have shrilled out a warning. Then he saved as much of his breath as he could, as some sort of power wave tore up the rocky sward to his left. He twisted and zigzagged in his flight, trying to get out of sight of the strangers. Once hidden from their eyes, he could cut back and head for the underground entrance to the service station. He glanced back finally. Two of the steel-blue creatures were jackrabbiting after him, rapidly closing the distance. John Carroll unsheathed the stub-ray pistol at his side, turned the oxygen dial up for greater exertion, increased the gravity pull in his spacesuit boots as he neared the ravine he'd been racing for. The oxygen was just taking hold when he hit the lip of the ravine and began sprinting through its man-high bush-strewn course. The power ray from behind ripped out great gobs of the sheltering bushes. But running naturally, bent close to the bottom of the ravine, John Carroll dodged the bare spots. Oxygen made the tremendous exertion easy for his lungs as he sped down the dim trail, hidden from the two steel-blue stalkers. He'd eluded them, temporarily at least, John Carroll decided when he finally edged off the dim trail and watched for movement along the route behind him. He stood up, finally, pushed aside the leafy overhang of a bush, and looked for landmarks along the edge of the ravine. He found one, a stubby bush shaped like a Maltese cross, clinging to the lip of the ravine. The hidden entrance to the service station wasn't far off. His pistol held ready, he moved quietly on down the ravine until the old watercourse made an abrupt hairpin turn. Instead of following around the sharp bend, John Carroll moved straight ahead through the overhanging bushes until he came to a dense thicket. Dropping to his hands and knees, he worked his way under the edge of the thicket into a hollowed-out space in the center. There, just ahead of him, was the lock leading into the service station. Slipping a key out of a leg pouch on the spacesuit, he jabbed it into the center of the lock, opening the lever housing. He pulled strongly on the lever. With a hiss of escaping air, the lock swung open. John Carroll darted inside, the door closing softly behind. At the end of the long tunnel, he stepped to the televisor which was fixed on the area surrounding the station. John Carroll saw none of the steel-blue creatures, but he saw their ship. It squatted like a smashed-down kid's top, its lock shut tight. He tuned the televisor to its widest range, and finally spotted one of the steel blues. He was looking into the stationary rocket engine. As Carroll watched, a second steel blue came crawling out of the ship. The two steel blues moved toward the center of the televisor range. They're coming toward the station, Carroll thought grimly. Carroll examined the two creatures. They were of the steel blue color from the crown of their egg-shaped heads to the tips of their walking appendages. They were about the height of Carroll, 6 feet, but where he tapered from broad shoulders to flat hips, they were straight up and down. They had no legs, just appendages, many-jointed that stretched and shrank independent of the other, but keeping the cylindrical body with its 4 pairs of tentacles on a level balance. Where their eyes would have been was an elliptical-shaped lens, covering half the egghead, with its converging ends curving around the sides of the head. Robots, John gauged immediately. But where were their masters? The steel blues moved out of the range of the televisor. A minute later, John heard a pounding from the station upstairs. He chuckled. They were like the wolf of pre-atomic days, who huffed and puffed to blow the house down. The outer shell of the station was formed from sterilite, the toughest metal in the solar system. With the self-sealing lock of the same resistant material, a mere pounding was nothing. John thought he'd have a look-see anyway. He went up the steel ladder leading to the station's power plant and the televisor that could look into every room within the station. He heaved a slight sigh when he reached the power room, for right at his hand were weapons to blast the ship from the asteroid. John adjusted one televisor to take in the lock of the station. Whoops. Let's try that sentence again. John adjusted one televisor to take in the lock to the station. His teeth suddenly clamped down on his lower lip. Those steel blues were pounding holes into the sterilite with round-headed metal clubs. But it was impossible. Sterilite didn't break up that easily. John leaped to a row of studs, lining up the revolving turret which capped the station so that its thin fin pointed at the squat ship of the invaders. Then he went to the atomic cannon's firing buttons. He pressed first the yellow, then the blue button. Finally, the red one. The thin fin, the cannon's sight, split in half as the turret opened and the coiled nose of the cannon protruded. There was a soundless flash, then a sharp crack. John was dumbfounded when he saw the bolt ricochet off the ship. This was no ship of the solar system. There was nothing that could withstand even the slight jolt of power given by the station cannon on any of the sun's worlds. But what was this? A piece of the ship had changed. A bubble of metal, like a huge drop of blue wax, dripped off the vessel and struck the rocket of the asteroid. It steamed and ran in rivulets. He pressed the red button again. Then, abruptly, he was on the floor of the power room, his legs strangely cut out from under him. He tried to move them. They lay flaccid. His arms seemed all right and tried to lever himself to an upright position. Damn, it seemed as if he were paralyzed from the waist down, but it couldn't happen that suddenly. He turned his head. A steel blue stood facing him. A forked tentacle held a square black box. John could read nothing in that metallic face. He said, voice muffled by the confines of the plastic helmet,
"Who are you?"
"I am," there was a rising inflection in the answer, "a steel blue." There were no lips on the steel blue's face to move.
"That is what I have named you,"
John Carroll said.
"but what are you?"
"A robot," came the immediate answer. John was quite sure that the steel blue was telepathic. "Yes," the steel blue answered. "We talk in the language of the mind. Come," he said peremptorily, motioning with the square black box. The paralysis left Carroll's legs. He followed the steel blue, aware that the lens he'd seen on the creature's face had a counterpart on the back of the egg head. Eyes in the back of his head, John thought. That's quite an innovation. "Thank you," Steel Blue said. There wasn't much fear in John Carroll's mind. Psychiatrists had proved that when he had applied for this high-paying but man-killing job as a lone watcher on the solar system's starways. Oop, I misread that, but I got the words right. There wasn't much fear in John Carroll's mind. Psychiatrists had proved that when he had applied for this high-paying but man-killing job as a lone watcher on the solar system's starways. He had little fear now, only curiosity. These steel blues didn't seem inimical. They could have snuffed out my life very simply. Perhaps they and Solarians can be friends. Steel Blue chuckled. John followed him through the sundered lock of the station. Carol stopped for a moment to examine the wreckage of the lock. It had been punched full of holes, as if it had been some soft cheese instead of a metal which Earthmen had spent nearly a century perfecting. "We appreciate your compliment," Steel Blue said, "but that metal also is found on our world. It's probably the softest and most malleable we have. We were surprised you, Earthmen, is it, use it as a protective metal."
Why are you in this system?
John asked, hardly expecting an answer. It came anyway. "For the same reason you Earthmen are reaching out farther into your system. We need living room. You have strategically placed planets for our use. We will use them." John sighed. For 400 years, scientists had been preaching preparedness as Earth flung her ships into the reaches of the solar system, taking the first long step toward the conquest of space. There are other races somewhere, they argued, as strong and as smart as man, many of them so transcending man in mental and inventive power that we must be prepared to strike the minute danger shows. Now here was the answer to the scientists' warning: invasion by extraterrestrials. "What did you say?" asked Steel Blue. "I couldn't understand."
Just thinking to myself.
John answered. It was a welcome surprise. Apparently his thoughts had to be directed outward rather than inward in order for the Steel Blues to read it. He followed the Steel Blue into the gaping lock of the invader's spaceship, wondering how he could warn Earth. The Space Patrol cruiser was due in for refueling at his service station in 21 days, but by that time he probably would be moldering in the rocky dust of the asteroid. It was pitch dark within the ship, but the Steel Blues seemed to have no trouble at all maneuvering through the maze of corridors. John followed him, attached to one tentacle. Finally, John and his guide entered a circular room, bright with light streaming from a glass-like, bulging skylight. They apparently were near topside of the vessel. A Steel Blue, more massive than his guide and with 4 more pairs of tentacles, including 2 short ones that grew from the top of its head, spoke out. "This is the Violator?" John Steel Blue nodded. "You know the penalty. Carry it out." "He is also an inhabitant of this system," John's guide added. "Examine him first, then give him the death." John Carroll shrugged as he was led from the lighted room through more corridors. If it got too bad, he still had the stub ray pistol. Anyway, he was curious. He'd taken on the lonely, nerve-wracking job of service station attendant just to see what it offered. Here was a part of it, and it was certainly something new. "This is the examination room," his Steel Blue said, almost contemptuously. A green effulgence surrounded him. There was a hiss. Simultaneously, as the tiny microphone on the outside of his suit picked up the hiss, he felt a chill go through his body. Then it seemed as if a half-dozen hands were inside him, examining his internal organs. His stomach contracted. He felt a squeeze on his heart. His lungs tickled. There were several more queer motions inside his body. Then another Steel Blue voice said, "He is a soft metal creature made up of metals that melt at a very low temperature. He also contains a liquid whose makeup I cannot ascertain by ray probe. Bring him back when the torture is done." John Carroll grinned a trifle wryly. What kind of torture could this be? Would it last 21 days? He glanced at the chronometer on his wrist. John's steel blue led him out of the alien ship and halted expectantly just outside the ship's lock. John Carroll waited too. He thought of the stub ray pistol holstered at his hip. Shoot my way out? It'd be fun while it lasted. But he toted up the disadvantages. He either would have to find a hiding place on the asteroid, and if the Steel Blues wanted him bad enough they could tear the whole place to pieces, or somehow get aboard the little life ship hidden in the service station. In that, he would be just a sitting duck. He shrugged off the slight temptation to use the pistol. He was still curious. And he was interested in staying alive as long as possible. There was a remote chance he might warn the SP ship. Unconsciously, he glanced toward his belt to see the little power pack which, if under ideal conditions, could finger out 50,000 miles into space. If he could somehow stay alive the 21 days, he might be able to warn the patrol. He couldn't do it by attempting to flee, for his life would be snuffed out immediately. The Steel Blue said quietly, "It might be ironical to let you warn that SP ship you keep thinking about, but we know your weapon now. Already our ship is equipped with a force field designed especially to deflect your atomic guns." John Carroll covered up his thoughts quickly. They could delve deeper than the surface of the mind, or wasn't I keeping a leash on my thoughts? The Steel Blue chuckled. "You get absent-minded, is it? Every once in a while." Just then, 4 other Steel Blues appeared, lugging great sheets of plastic and various other equipment. They dumped their loads and began unbundling them. Working swiftly, they built a plastic igloo, smaller than the living room in the larger service station igloo. They ranged instruments inside. One of them John Carroll recognized as an air pump from within the station, and they laid out a pallet. When they were done, John saw a miniature reproduction of the service station, lacking only the cannon cap and fin, and with clear plastic walls instead of the opaqueness of the other. His Steel Blue said, "We have reproduced the atmosphere of your station so that you be watched while you undergo the torture under the normal conditions of your life."
What is this torture?
John Carroll asked. The answer was almost caressing. "It is a liquid we use to dissolve metals. It causes joints to harden if even so much as a drop remains on it long. It eats away the metal, leaving a scaly residue which crumbles eventually into dust. We will dilute it with a harmless liquid for you, since number 1 does not wish you to die instantly. Enter your—" The the Steel Blue hesitated. "Mausoleum. You die in your own atmosphere. However, we took the liberty of purifying it. There were dangerous elements in it." John walked into the little igloo. The Steel Blues sealed the lock, fingered dials and switches on the outside. John's spacesuit deflated. Pressure was building up in the igloo. He took a sample of the air, found that it was good, although quite rich in oxygen compared with what he'd been using in the service station and in his suit. With a sigh of relief, he took off his helmet and gulped huge draughts of the air. He sat down on the pallet and waited for the torture to begin. The Steel Blues crowded about the igloo, staring at him through elliptical eyes. Apparently, they, too, were waiting for the torture to begin. John thought the excess of oxygen was making him lightheaded. He stared at a cylinder which was beginning to sprout tentacles from the circle. He rubbed his eyes and looked again. An opening, like the adjustable eyepiece of a space scope, was appearing in the center of the cylinder. A square, glass-like tumbler sat in the opening disclosed in the 4-foot cylinder that had sprouted tentacles. It contained a yellowish liquid. One of the tentacles reached into the opening and clasped the glass. The opening closed, and the cylinder, propelled by locomotor appendages, moved toward John. He didn't like the looks of the liquid in the tumbler. It looked like an acid of some sort. He raised to his feet. He unsheathed the stub ray gun and prepared to blast the cylinder. The cylinder moved so fast John felt his eyes jump in his head. He brought the stub ray gun up, but he was helpless. The pistol kept on going up. With a deft movement, one of the tentacles had speared it from his hand and was holding it out of reach. John kicked at the glass in the cylinder's hand, but he was too slow. Two tentacles gripped the kicking leg. Another struck him in the chest, knocking him to the pallet. The same tentacle, assisted by a new one, pinioned his shoulders. Four tentacles held him supine. The cylinder lifted a glass-like cap from the tumbler of liquid. Lying there helplessly, John was remembering an old fairy tale he'd read as a kid. Something about a fellow named Socrates who was given a cup of hemlock to drink. It was the fini for Socrates, or the finish. There might be an H missing. But the old hero had been nonchalant and calm about the whole thing. With a sigh, John Carroll, who was curious unto death, relaxed and said, "All right, bub, you don't have to force-feed me. I'll take it like a man." The cylinder apparently understood him, for it handed him the tumbler. It even reholstered his stub ray pistol. John brought the glass of liquid under his nose. The fumes of the liquid were pungent. It brought tears to his eyes. He looked at the cylinder, then at the steel blues crowding around the plastic igloo. He waved the glass at the audience. "To Earth, ever triumphant." He toasted. Then he drained the glass at a gulp. Its taste was bitter, and he felt hot prickles jab at his scalp. It was like eating very hot peppers. His eyes filled with tears. He coughed as the stuff went down. But he was still alive, he thought in amazement. He'd drunk the hemlock and was still alive. The reaction set in quickly. He hadn't known until then how tense he'd been. Now, with the torture ordeal over, he relaxed. He laid down on the pallet and went to sleep. There was one lone steel blue watching him when he rubbed the sleep out of his eyes and sat up. He vanished almost instantly. He, or another like him, returned immediately, accompanied by a half-dozen others, including the multi-tentacled creature known as Number One. One said,
You are alive.
The thought registered amazement.
When you lost consciousness, we thought you had,
There was a hesitation.
as you say, died.
No, John Carroll said. I didn't die. I was just plain dead beat, so I went to sleep. The Steel Blues apparently didn't understand.
Good it is that you live. The torture will continue,
Spoke Number One before loping away. The cylinder business began again. This time, John drank the bitter liquid slowly, trying to figure out what it was. It had a familiar, tantalizing taste, but he couldn't quite put a taste finger on it. His belly said he was hungry. He glanced at his chronometer. Only 20 days left before the SP ship arrived. Would this torture, he chuckled, last until then? But he was growing more and more conscious that his belly was screaming for hunger. The liquid had taken the edge off his thirst. It was on the 5th day of his torture that John Carroll decided that he was going to get something to eat or perish in the attempt. The circle sat passively in its niche in the circle. The cylinder. Let's try that again. I'm so sorry. This is what happens when I read ahead while trying to. Yeah. The cylinder sat passively in its niche in the circle. A dozen steel blues were watching as John put on his helmet and unsheathed his stub ray. They merely watched as he pressed the stubray's firing stud. Invisible rays licked out of the bulbous muzzle of the pistol. The plastic splintered. John was out of his goldfish bowl and striding toward his own igloo adjacent to the service station when a steel blue accosted him.
Out of my way,
Grunted John, waving the stubray.
I'm hungry.
I'm the first steel blue you met, said the creature who barred his way. Go back to your torture.
But I'm so hungry I'll chew off one of your tentacles and eat it without seasoning.
Eat?
The steel blue sounded puzzled.
I want to refuel. I've got to have food to keep my engine going.
The steel blue chuckled.
So the hemlock, as you call it, is beginning to affect you at last? Back to the torture room.
Like dust.
John growled. He pressed the firing stud on the stubray gun. One of Steel Blue's tentacles broke off and fell to the rocky sward. Steel Blue jerked out the box he'd used once before. A tentacle danced over it. Abruptly, John found himself standing on a pinnacle of rock. Steel Blue had cut a swath around him 15 feet deep and 5 wide.
Back to the room,
Steel Blue commanded. John resheathed the stubray pistol, shrugged noncommittally, and leaped at the trench. He walked slowly back and re-entered the torture chamber. The Steel Blues rapidly repaired the damage he'd done. As he watched them, John was still curious, but he was getting mad underneath at the cold egoism of the Steel Blues. By the shimmering clouds of Earth, by her green fields and dark forests, he'd stay alive to warn the SP ship. Yes, he'd stay alive till then, and send the story of the Steel Blues' corrosive acid to it. Then hundreds of Earth's ships could equip themselves with spray guns and squirt citric acid and watch the Steel Blues fade away. It sounded almost silly to John Carroll. The fruit acid of Earth to repel these invaders. It doesn't sound possible. That couldn't be the answer. Citric acid wasn't the answer, John Carroll discovered a week later. The Steel Blue who had captured him in the power room of the service station came in to examine him.
You're still holding out, I see,
he observed after poking John in every sensitive part of his body.
I'll suggest to number one that we increase the power of the, hemlock. How do you feel?
Between the rich oxygen and the dizziness of hunger, John was a bit delirious. But he answered honestly enough.
My guts feel as if they're chewing each other up. My bones ache. My joints creak. I can't coordinate, I'm so hungry.
That is the hemlock,
Blue Steel said. It was when he quaffed the new and stronger draft that John knew that his hope that it was citric. Whoops, let's try that sentence again. Like I misread it twice in my head. I was like, wait. I'm so sorry. This is the problem with doing it live. It was when he quaffed the new and stronger draft that John knew that his hope that it was citric acid was squelched. The acid taste was weaker, which meant that the citric acid was the diluting liquid. It was the liquid he couldn't taste beneath the tang of the citric acid that was the corrosive acid. On the 14th day, John was so weak he didn't feel much like moving around. He let the cylinder feed him the hemlock. Number one came again to see him, and went away chuckling.
Decrease the dilution. This Earthman is at last beginning to suffer.
I try, Blueberry Pie, I try. Thanks for tuning in. Staying alive had now become a fetish with John. On the 16th day, the Earthman realized that the Steel Blues were also waiting for the SP ship. The extraterrestrials had repaired the blue ship where the service station atomic ray had struck. and they were doing a little target practice with the plastic bubbles only a few miles above the asteroid. When his chronometer clocked off the beginning of the 21st day, John received a tumbler of the hemlock from the hands of Number One himself.
It is the hemlock, he chuckled. Undiluted. Drink it, and your torture is over. You will die before your SP ship is destroyed. We have played with you long enough. Today we begin to toy with your SP ship. Drink up, Earthman. Drink to enslavement.
Weak though he was, John lunged to his feet, spilling the tumbler of liquid. It ran cool along the plastic arm of his spacesuit. He changed his mind about throwing the contents on Number One. With a smile, he set the glass at his lips and drank. Then he laughed at Number One. The SP ship will turn your ship into jelly. Number One swept out, chuckling.
Boast if you will, Earthman. It's your last chance.
There was an exultation in John's heart that deadened the hunger and washed away the nausea. At last he knew what the hemlock was. He sat on the pallet adjusting the little power pack radio. The SP ship should now be within range of the set. The Space Patrol was notorious for its accuracy in keeping to schedule. Seconds counted like years. They had to be on the nose, or it meant disaster or death. He sent out the call letters. AX to SP-101, AX to SP-101, AX to SP-101. 3 times he sent the call, and then began sending his message, hoping that his signal was reaching the ship. He couldn't know if they answered. Though the power pack could get out a message over a vast distance, it could not pick up messages even when backed by an SP ship's power unless the ship was only a few hundred miles away. The power pack was strictly a distress signal. He didn't know how long he'd been sending, nor how many times his weary voice had repeated the short but desperate message. He kept watching the heavens and hoping. Abruptly, he knew the SP ship was coming, for the blue ship of the Steel Blues was rising silently from the asteroid. Up and up it rose, then flames flickered in a circle about its curious shape. The ship disappeared, suddenly accelerating. John Carroll strained his eyes. Finally, he looked away from the heavens, to the 2 Steel Blues who stood negligently outside the goldfish bowl. Once more, John used the stub ray pistol. He marched out of the plastic igloo and ran toward the service station. He didn't know how weak he was until he stumbled and fell only a few feet from his prison. The Steel Blues just watched him. He crawled on, around the circular pit in the sward of the asteroid, where one Steel Blue had shown him the power of his weapon. He'd been crawling through a nightmare for years when the quiet voice penetrated his dulled mind. Take it easy, Carol. You're among friends. He pried open his eyes, with his will. He saw the blue and gold of a space guard's uniform. He sighed and drifted into unconsciousness. He was still weak days later when Captain Ron Small of SP-101 said,
Yes, Carol, it's ironical. They fed you what they thought was sure death, and it's the only thing that kept you going long enough to warn us.
I was dumb for a long time, Carol said. I thought that it was the acid, almost to the very last. But when I drank that last glass, I knew they didn't have a chance. They were metal monsters. No wonder they feared that liquid. It would rust their joints, short their wiring, and kill them. No wonder they stared when I kept alive after drinking enough to completely annihilate a half dozen of them.
But what happened when you met the ship?
But what happened when you met the ship? The space captain grinned.
Not much. Our crew was busy creating a hollow shell filled with water to be shot out of a rocket tube converted into a projectile thrower. These steel blues, as you call them, put traction beams on us and started tugging us toward the asteroid. We tried a couple of atomic shots, but when they just glanced off, we gave up. They weren't expecting the shell of water. When it hit that blue ship, you could almost see it oxidize before your eyes. I guess they knew what was wrong right away. They let go of the traction beams and tried to get away. They forgot about the force field, so we just poured atomic fire into the weakening ship. It just melted away.
John Carroll got up from the divan where he'd been lying. They thought I was a metal creature too. But where do you suppose they came from? The captain shrugged.
Who knows?
John set 2 glasses on the table.
Have a drink of the best damn water?
Have a drink of the best damn water in the solar system? He asked Captain Small.
Don't mind if I do.
The water twinkled in the 2 glasses, winking as if it knew just what it had done. And so this says, transcriber's note, this e-text was produced from Planet Stories, July of 1952. And that was Acid Bath by Vaseleos Garson. Or is it Bill Garson? Well, it says Vaseleos. So I'm going to go with that because it sounds really cool. Alrighty, I do have one more story prepped here. It's even shorter. Let me get that captured here. Properties. Oops, wrong one. That one. There we go. And it is called A Bad Day for Vermin by Keith Laumer from Galaxy Science Fiction, February of 1964. Oldie but a goodie. Keith Laumer, I want to say, is the guy who did the Bolo series? Or originated it? I might be confusing it with someone else. Yes, he was the guy who did both Bolo and Retief, which are pretty great series, and I do recommend checking them out. The Bolo series is about kind of the evolution of science fiction-y tanks from like slightly better tanks into like planet sieging weapons platforms and then like colonization AIs. It's pretty rad. There's some really good stuff in there. Retief is also good. I'll leave it at that. He is dead now. I think he had brain disease by the end. I don't remember if it was Alzheimer's or not. I'd have to actually reread like the Wikipedia article or other article. Alrighty, so A Bad Day for Vermin by Keith Laumer. They came in friendship and love. They couldn't help the way they looked. Judge Carter Gates of the Third Circuit Court finished his chicken salad on whole wheat, thoughtfully crumpled the wax paper bag, and turned to drop it in the wastebasket behind his chair, and sat transfixed. Through his second-floor office window he saw a 40-foot flower-petal shape of pale turquoise settling gently between the well-tended petunia beds on the courthouse lawn. On the upper, or stem end of the vessel, a translucent pink panel popped up, and a slender, graceful form not unlike a large violet caterpillar undulated into view. Judge Gates whirled to the telephone. Half an hour later he put it to the officials gathered with him in a tight group on the lawn.
Boys, this thing is intelligent. Any fool can see that. It's putting together what my boy assures me is some kind of talking machine, and any minute now it's going to start communicating. It's been 20 minutes since I notified Washington of this thing. It won't be long before somebody back there decides this is top secret and slaps a freeze on us here that will make the Manhattan Project look like a publicity campaign. Now, I say this is the biggest thing that ever happened to Plum County, but if we don't aim to be put but if we don't aim to be put right out of the picture, we'd better move fast. What do you got in mind, Judge? I propose we hold an open hearing right here in the courthouse, the minute that thing gets its gear to working. We'll put it on the air. Tom Clembers from the radio station's already stringing wires, I see. Too bad we've got no TV equipment, but Jody Hurd has a movie camera. We'll put Willow Grove on the map bigger'n Cape Canaveral ever was. We're with you on that, Carter.
10 minutes after the melodious voice of the Fianna's translator had requested escort to the village headman, the visitor was looking over the crowded courtroom with an expression reminiscent of a St. Bernard puppy hoping for a romp. The rustle of feet and throat clearing subsided, and the speaker began. People of the green world, happy the cycle. Heads turned at the clump of feet coming down the side aisle. A heavy torsoed man of middle age, bald, wearing a khaki shirt and trousers and rimless glasses, and with a dark leather holster slapping at his hip at each step, cleared the end of the front row of seats, planted himself, feet apart, yanked a heavy nickel-plated .44 revolver from the holster, took aim, and fired 5 shots into the body of the Fianna at a range of 10 feet. The violet form whipped convulsively, writhed from the bench to the floor with a sound like a wet fire hose being dropped, uttered a gasping twitter, and lay still. The gunman turned, dropped the pistol, threw up his hands, and called, "Sheriff Hoskins, I'm putting myself in your protective custody." There was a moment of stunned silence, then a rush of spectators for the alien. The sheriff's 309-pound bulk bellied through the shouting mob to take up a stand before the khaki-clad man.
"I always knew you was a mean one, Cecil Stump,"
he said, unlimbering handcuffs.
"ever since I seen you making up them ground glass baits for Joe Potter's dog. But I never thought I'd see you turn to cold-blooded murder."
He waved at the bystanders.
"Clear path through here. I'm taking my prisoner over to the jail."
"Just a dag-blam minute, Sheriff."
Stump's face was pale, his glasses were gone, and one khaki shoulder strap dangled. But what was almost a grin twisted one meaty cheek. He hid his hands behind his back, leaned away from the cuffs.
"I don't like that word prisoner. I asked you for protection. And better look out who you go throwing that word murder off at, too. I ain't murdered nobody."
The sheriff blinked, turned to roar,
"How's the victim, Doc?"
A small gray head rose from bending over the limp form of the Fianna.
"Deader'n a mackerel, Sheriff."
"I guess that's it. Let's go, Cecil."
"What's the charge?"
"First-degree murder."
"Who'd I murder?"
"Why, you killed this stranger."
"That ain't no stranger. That's a varmint. Murder's got to do with killing humans. Way I understand it. You gonna tell me that thing's a human?"
10 people shouted at once. Human as I am, intelligent being, tell me you can simply kill. Must be some kind of law. The sheriff raised his hands, his jowls drawn down in a scowl.
"What about it, Judge Gates? Any law against Cecil Stump killing
The judge thrust out his lower lip.
"Well, let's see,"
he began.
"Technically—"
"Good Lord!" someone blurted. "You mean the laws on murder don't define what constitutes... I mean, what..."
"What a human is?" Stump snorted. Whatever it says, it sure Bob don't include no purple worms. That's varmint, pure and simple. Ain't no different killing than any other critter. And by God, we'll get 'em for malicious damage, a man called. Or hunting without a license, out of season. Carrying concealed weapons. Stump went for his hip pocket, fumbled out a fat, shapeless wallet, extracted a thumbed rectangle of folded paper, offered it. I'm a licensed exterminator. Got a permit to carry the gun, too. I ain't broken no law. He grinned openly now. Just doing my job, Sheriff, and at no charge to the county.
A smaller man with bristly red hair flared his nostrils at Stump.
You bloodthirsty idiot. He raised a fist and shook it. We'll be a national disgrace. Worse than Little Rock. Lynching's too good for you.
Hold on there, Weinstein, the sheriff cut in. Let's no go set no lynch talk, get no lynch talk started.
Lynch it is. Lynch, is it?
Whoops.
Lynch, is it? Cecil Stump bellowed, his face suddenly red. Why, I done a favor for every man here. Now you listen to me. What is that thing over there? He jerked a blunt thumb toward the judicial bench. It's some kind of critter from Mars or someplace. You know that as well as me. And what's it here for? I ain't for it. Whoops. It ain't for the good of likes of you and me. I can tell you that. It's them or us. And this time, by God, we got in the first lick. What? Why, you hate monger. Now, hold on there. I'm as liberal minded as the next feller. Hell, oh boy, I can't say that. Okay. I should have read this ahead of time. Zoinks. Hell, I like a blank, and I can't hardly tell a blank from a white man. But when it comes down to taking a damn purple worm and calling it humor, that's where I draw the line. Whoo! Shoot, I should have left a picture up, not the text. That's going to get me zapped. Sheriff Hoskins pushed between Stump and the surging front rank of the crowd.
Stay back there. I want you to disperse peaceably and let the law handle this.
I reckon I'll push off now, Sheriff. Stump hitched up his belt. I figured you might have to calm 'em down right at first, but now they've had a chance to think it over and see I ain't broken no law. Ain't none of these law-abiding folks gonna do anything illegal, like trying to get rough with a licensed exterminator just doing his job. He stooped, retrieved his gun.
Here, I'll take that, Sheriff Hoskins said. You can consider your gun license canceled, and your exterminating license too.
Stump grinned again, handed the revolver over. Sure, I'm cooperative, Sheriff. Anything you say. Send it around to my place when you're done with it. He pushed his way through the crowd to the corridor door.
The rest of you stay put.
A portly man with a head of bushy white hair pushed his way through to the bench.
I'm calling an emergency town meeting to order here and now.
He banged the gavel on the scarred bench top, glanced down at the body of the dead alien, now covered by a flag.
Gentlemen, we've got to take fast action. If the wire services get hold of this before we've gone on record, Willow Grove will be a blighted area.
Look here, Willard, Judge Gates called, rising. This mob isn't competent to take legal action.
Never mind what's legal, Judge. Sure, this calls for federal legislation, maybe a constitutional amendment, but in the meantime, we're going to redefine what constitutes a person within the incorporated limits of Willow Grove.
That's the least we can do, a thin-faced woman snapped, glaring at Judge Gates. Do you think we're going to sit here and condone this outrage? Nonsense! Gates shouted. I don't like what happened any better than you do, but a person
well, person's got 2 arms and 2 legs and...
Shape's got nothing to do with it, the chairman cut in. Bears walk on 2 legs. Dave Zawacki lost his in the war. Monkeys have hands.
Any intelligent creature, the woman started. Nope, that won't do either, and my unfortunate cousin boy Melvin was born an imbecile. Poor lad. Now, folks, there's no time to waste. Oh, wait, I'm using the wrong voice. Zounds.
Nope, that won't do either. My unfortunate cousin's boy Melvin was born an imbecile, poor lad. Now, folks, there's no time to waste. We'll find it very difficult to formulate a satisfactory definition based on considerations such as these. However, I think we can resolve the question in terms that will form a basis for future legislation on the question. It's going to make some big changes in things. Hunters aren't going to like it, and the meat industry will be affected. But if, as it appears, we're entering into an era of contact with, creatures from other worlds, we've got to get our house in order. You tell 'em, Senator!
Someone yelled.
We better leave this for Congress to figure out,
Another voice insisted.
We got to do something.
The senator held up his hands.
Quiet, everybody. There'll be reporters here in a matter of minutes. Maybe our ordnance won't hold water, but it'll start 'em thinking. It'll make a lot better copy for Willow Grove than the killing.
What you got in mind, Senator?
Just this,
The senator said solemnly.
a person is any harmless creature.
Feet shuffled. Someone coughed. What about a man who commits a violent act, then? Judge Gates demanded. What's he, eh?
That's obvious, gentlemen, the senator said flatly. He's vermin.
On the courthouse steps, Cecil Stump stood, hands in hip pockets, talking to a reporter from the big town paper in Mattoon, surrounded by a crowd of latecomers who had missed the excitement inside. He described the accuracy of his 5 shots, the sound they had made hitting the big blue snake, and the ludicrous spectacle of the latter had presented in its death agony. He winked at a foxy man in overalls picking his nose at the edge of the crowd.
Guess it'll be a while before any more damn reptiles move in here like they own the place, he concluded.
The courthouse doors banged wide. Excited citizens poured forth, veering aside from Cecil Stump. The crowd around him thinned, broke up as its members collared those emerging with hot news. The reporter picked a target.
Perhaps you'd care to give me a few details of the action taken by the, special committee, sir.
Senator Custis pursed his lips.
A session of the town council was called, he said. We've defined what a person is in this town.
Stump, standing 10 feet away, snorted.
Can't touch me with no ex-post factory law.
And also what can be classed as vermin,
Custis went on. Stump closed his mouth with a snap.
Here, that's supposed to be some kind of slam at me, Custis? By God, come election time.
Above, the door opened again. A tall man in a leather jacket stepped out, stood looking down. The crowd pressed back. Senator Custis and the reporter moved aside. The newcomer came down the steps slowly. He carried Cecil Stump's nickel-plated .44 in his hand. Standing alone now, Stump watched him.
Here,
he said. His voice carried a sudden note of strain.
who are you?
The man reached the foot of the steps, raised the revolver, and cocked it with a thumb. I'm the new exterminator, he said. Mic drop. So yeah, that was A Bad Day for Vermin by Keith Laumer from Galaxy Science Fiction, February of 1964. Fun times! I really hope the video doesn't get dinged for showing the text of a And words that I probably am fine with, fair use and all that. It's written in the story, but I'm not gonna chance it. Even though it was coming from a scumbag who got executed right at the end. Yeah. So, say what you will. Don't kill aliens on a peaceful mission to Earth. Hey, on the plus side, at least the aliens landed in like the one town that was like, yo, let's take immediate action to make sure we never have violent altercations like this ever again. It also means that if aliens invade violently, we will absolutely ruin their day. So yeah, hope people dug it. I know it's a super short one today. Normally I go like 2 hours and it's only going to be like one today, but that's okay because I got things to do. So yeah, um, thanks to anyone who tuned in. Um, I do these weekly. Next week, I will either be starting. Oh, because I do want to read a C.J. Sherry novel on this. I almost don't care which one. I would do Citeen, but that book's like immense. As cool as it would just take forever to get through. I'd be at it like half the year. Um, probably then Heavy Time. Probably Heavy Time. By C.J. Sherry. Cherry? I don't actually know how it's pronounced. Failing that, that's sort of that's dependent on whether I have done adequate prep work for that. In this case, getting like cover images and all that stuff, which I like to do for my streams. Failing that, I'll just do more short stories again, because that works. So yeah, thanks again for tuning in. I do these every week on Free Read Fridays starting about noon Eastern Standard Time. I do other streams throughout the week, such as Mecha Mondays, where I do something giant robot related or mecha adjacent, as well as Warframe Wednesdays. If you want to catch me live on those, same times on those days, noon Eastern Standard, usually about 2 hour runtime. Everything is archived in the link that I've provided for YouTube. It should all be archived there. I'm working on doing an archival project, getting hard copies unquote, downloading uh, the various read aloud files so that I can maybe start editing some of them. But I can't make any promises on that. Alrighty. Thanks again. Have a good one. Stay safe, stay sane, and enjoy life. And the post Turkey Day glow if you have partooken of such things yesterday. Alrighty. See you all later. Thanks again. And read books.